What's up, everybody? Happy Thursday. Welcome to the Pack a Day podcast. If you're watching on YouTube or Packer Reports, thanks for tuning in. I always appreciate it. Today, I'm going to be going over my 5 things that Green Bay has to accomplish in this upcoming draft. And it's as simple as drafting good players at positions of need, right? Simple as that. 1, 2, 3, you're all set and done. But I'm going to be going, at least trying to go a little bit deeper than that today. So let's start by going over again 1 through 5, not in any particular order, but the 5 things that Green Bay must accomplish in this draft. And number 1 is they have to find somebody who can return a freaking kick or punt, or at least be in that conversation. Right now, Tyler Ervin is not on this roster, and it could be something where maybe they look for somebody or a cheap free agent down the line, something like that. But get somebody at some point who has some skills to return a kick or return a punt, for the love of all things holy. And right now, who's your punt returner? Like Josh Jackson? Who's your kick returner? Malik Taylor? Like, that's not good enough. If you want to bring in a new special teams coach, at least give that guy something to work with. And right now, that player does not exist on the roster. And one of the most egregious things for me last year, Green Bay did a lot of things right when it came to roster development. And I know people didn't like the draft last year and things like that. But one of the more egregious things is that they had a 69-man roster, 53 on the active and 16 on the practice squad. And they could call those players up. And they couldn't find one player on that when Tyler Ervin was hurt, of course, but he was the majority of the year. They couldn't find one player on any of that roster that could kick return or punt return at any sort of decent level. Like, how is that remotely possible? So that has to change. And whether you look at a Dwayne Eskridge, a Kadarius Toney early in the draft, Daz Newsome, Khalil Herbert, Demetric Felton, Avery Williams, Marquez Stevenson, all of these are players at different positions, right? You've had some wide receivers, obviously, on that list. Demetric Felton is a running back, as is Khalil Herbert. Avery Williams is a corner. Like, it doesn't have to be that you're spending a premium pick on a receiver to get a returner. Like, there are running backs, wide receivers, corners, etc., who can help you in the return game. And Avery Williams is a great example of somebody that's probably going to be available on day 3. He is a special teams fanatic. He could potentially be a slot corner for you. He could return kicks. He could return punts. Some teams are even viewing him as a running back. So you could get somebody who could be kind of like a third running back on game days, an emergency corner, defensive back, and play on literally every one of your special teams, including return kicks and return punts. Sign me the hell up with a day 3 pick. Like, that's an ideal day 3 pick. So find someone. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's some D3 guy that I've never heard of. If he's got good speed and knows how to return a damn football, sign me the hell up. Just find a returner, period, end of story. That's number 1. Sorry for the tangent on that one. Number 2, find players who can contribute now. And this is interesting, right? That's an obvious one, right? But Ben Fennell, when on the Pack a Day podcast, I had him on a while back, and I think this was after the season, and he asked me the question during the podcast, and it threw me for a loop at the time, but he said, do the Packers have a draft and develop problem? And my initial reaction is, well, no, I mean, draft and develop, that's the best way to build a team, and I still firmly believe that. But his point being is, this isn't the same NFL anymore. The NFL schemes, in a lot of ways, at a lot of positions, are becoming more and more similar to those that are in college. And players are being able to come in and contribute at a much faster level and in a much quicker pace. It's not always, it's not all the time, but we're seeing it more and more often. Even in a season last year where rookies didn't have any OTAs, any mini camps, any preseason football, we saw some rookies play at an insanely high level. Tristan Wirfs, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive tackle. Justin Jefferson, the wide receiver for the Vikings. Antoine Winfield, the safety for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And the offensive tackle for the Cleveland Browns as well, Jedrick Wills. There's a ton of players in this past year's draft that played at a high level at a variety of different positions. Those are just a handful that I'm mentioning there. Jalen Johnson, the corner, played well for the Bears. So the time, there's always a time and a place for draft and develop, no questions asked. But right now is a time where you can go out and find players who can help you now and can contribute now. And I've always mostly been a fan of the way that Green Bay's done things, where you're drafting for next season. Who are your big free agents going to be next season? Who can you bring in to potentially replace them and bring them up to speed now so they don't have to play on day one and you can give them some time to develop? And listen, that's all great and good. Those are good philosophies to have for the most part. But you're in a spot right now where everything's about to hit the fan next year when it comes to a salary cap standpoint. And you're really looking at a potential 1-year window right now where you need to open this thing up as wide as possible for Aaron Rodgers and this team that just went back-to-back NFC Championship games. Tampa Bay Buccaneers a season ago are not in that Super Bowl or winning that Super Bowl without Tristan Wirfs or Antoine Winfield. Now, you can say, Andy, some of the guys you just mentioned, Justin Jefferson, Tristan Wirfs, Jedrick Wills, like it's all great and good, but like Green Bay wasn't high enough to pick those players. Okay, sure. But there was a ton of players in the second round that had big impacts on their teams that did help their teams, whether it be, Michael Pittman late in the season for the Indianapolis Colts. Jalen Johnson was definitely a big time player for the Bears at corner a season ago and certainly helpful of that team. Antoine Winfield, I mentioned, second round pick, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like, it's up to you as a staff to find guys who can come in and compete from day one. And I want to see a little bit more of that from Green Bay, especially right now. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can find a quote unquote best player available at a position that you need both now and long term that can also come in and compete right away. It's not a foreign idea. You can do that. So I would love to see Green Bay be a little bit more aggressive with how they attack this draft and saying, hey, we're going to get somebody with upside still. We're going to get somebody that can help us both now and in the future, but we really think this player can come in and contribute right away. And I want to see a little bit more of that from Green Bay and really, especially the top 100 picks. Number 3, and this isn't anything that I'm, no rocket science, no breaking news here, but you have to develop some competition, some real immediate competition at both cornerback and defensive line. And I could say here you have to get starters at those positions, and offensive line's right there as well, right? But you at least want to bring some guys in that can compete and and push the guys ahead of them. Make Josh Jackson and Chandon Sullivan and Kevin King work to keep their jobs at cornerback. Like, make it so that the guards from last year, whether it be a Simon Stepaniak, whether it be a John Runyon Jr., whether it be a Lucas Patrick, that those guys have to fight for their starting positions because you brought in competition. Make Dean Lowry and Tyler Lancaster and Kingsley Keke earn those spots next to Kenny Clark. Like, that's what I want to see in this draft, is not only just bringing in guys to build depth at those positions, but guys that can come in and compete. And I'm not saying you have to go 3 for 3 and they need to find a starting corner, defensive lineman, and offensive lineman. Like, if you can, great. But I at least want to see some guys who can push those players and hopefully make them practice at a higher level so that they're better, just straight up better from competition. And again, if they can come in and compete and play right away, awesome. I just mentioned that, but at least, if nothing else, provide some pressure for those guys that are fringe starters, I should say, in Sullivan and King, Lucas Patrick to some extent, although I like Patrick as a starter, John Runyon Jr., Simon Stepaniak, Kingsley Keke, Lancaster, Lowry, the list goes on. I want to see competition for those players. Number 4, I want to see Green Bay continue to be aggressive in the first and second round with trading up to go get players, or maybe being aggressive and trading back if a situation presents itself where you can stay in the round and pick up another premium pick like that Jair Alexander Saints trade. I mean, that's like a once in a lifetime type of trade probably, but be aggressive in those first 2 rounds. Move around as you need, but don't hesitate to move up. As I mentioned, this is the team that's ready to compete now. If it's going to take your 2 fourth-round picks to get up in the early 20s again to get a guy like Greg Newsome or a guy that you think can come in and compete and start from day one and be a long-term answer at the position, do it. No questions asked. This isn't a team that needs 10 new players in the draft to come in and compete necessarily, but they could really use 3 guys in that top 100 that can come in and potentially play at a high level and push the players ahead of them at specific positions. And I just mentioned those: corner, offensive line, defensive line, to be specific. I would love to see Green Bay be aggressive. And maybe they stay where they're at in their first round, and maybe they use those 4th-round picks to get up even higher in the second round, and you end up with 2 top 45 picks, something like that. I could even see a situation where Green Bay trades down in the first round, maybe picks up like a second and a 3rd-round pick or something like that, and then tries to take their 2/3 or something like that, 2/3 and a fourth or something, and get up and have 3 picks in the second round. I wouldn't hate that either if you could somehow figure out a way to get 3 picks, between pick 32 and maybe 60, somewhere in there. Like I think there's an avenue for success. But however it is, I would love to see Green Bay be aggressive in that top 100 to attack positions that can help them now, that can be long-term fits, and that can, again, compete with some of the players on the roster right here and right now, and continue to help Green Bay push to make that championship run this upcoming season. And then last but not least, I am a full-on believer in what Green Bay ultimately has as an idea of trying to pick top-tier athletes overall throughout the course of the draft. Brian Gutekunst has definitely had a type. And when you look at the analytics of these different positions, more often than not, it is the top end athletic players who have good tape, who are performing well at the highest level. You're not seeing very many unathletic guys in the top, 20% of their players. If they're not in the top 20% of athleticism at their position, most of those guys are struggling to compete at the highest of levels. But I think Green Bay needs to pump the brakes just a little bit and be a little bit more open-minded to the guys that maybe aren't in the 80th or 90th percentile. Some of the top players on their team, including David Bakhtiari, who was a 6.74 RAS guy, basically 67th percentile athlete. Devontae Adams, 65th percentile. Kenny Clark, 75th. Za'Darius Smith was just god-awful. It depends on what position you want to list him at. No matter what, it was terrible. Aaron Rodgers is a quarterback. It doesn't really matter for that, but he was at 57th percentile, right? These are some of the best players on Green Bay, and they're not high-end premium athletes at their given positions. Meanwhile, some of the best athletes that they've drafted, Josh Jones, Jason Spriggs, Josh Jackson, Oren Burks, Kevin King, have not fared so well. So there's other success stories as well. Jair Alexander, Rashawn Gary for the most part is trending in the right direction. Elton Jenkins, those were all high-end athletes that certainly have panned out. But on the whole, they have some damn good football players on their roster that weren't weren't in that top 20% of athletes, and they turned out amazing. So I like the general philosophy, but just because they're a 90th percentile or better athlete does not make them a good football player. Jason Spriggs had a fatal flaw in his game. One, his technique was messed up. You can hope that you can fix technique. But 2, he consistently had mental errors. It was very prevalent at Indiana. You can be a high-end level athlete that moves as well as any offensive lineman in the history of the NFL. But if you can't get your technique down and you continue to have mental lapses, you can't play in the NFL. And that was Jason Spriggs to a T. Gifted beyond gifted, not a good football player. So I love, again, the overall thought process of getting these high-end athletes in at each respective position, but they have to play football. And I would rather have top-end football players that maybe, again, are in the 50th, 60th, 70th percentile than these high-end athletes that haven't put it together from a football standpoint. So, and Josh Jones, again, didn't have the mental aptitude for the position at all times. Like his instincts were just off. It just is what it is. Josh Jackson hasn't been able to figure out any position on the field. He had one specific role in college. He did that well. It hasn't translated in the NFL. Like, these are things that Green Bay has to do a better job of picking up on. Easier said than done. Every NFL team screws this stuff up in almost every round. I'm not, bashing the Packers here. The draft is an inexact science, but I think maybe pumping the brakes a little bit on those athletic thresholds to try to get just better football players in the door could potentially open up some more avenues to try to find some of these really good football players that maybe just aren't the 90th percentile athletes. That's going to do it for me today. 5 things. Again, I'll just recap really quick. Find some kick returners and punt returners. Find players who can contribute now. Doesn't always have to be developing and playing 2 or 3 years from now. Develop competition, defensive line, corner, offensive line. Continue to be aggressive with trades in the first and second and even the third round, that top 100 type range, and maybe ease up on those athletic thresholds just a bit. Thanks as always for following and listening. I'll be right back here tomorrow. Make sure to check out today's audio podcast wherever you get it. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.